You're tuned into Metro FM for the SABC Stephen Bantu Biko Memorial Special Broadcast. It was on this day in 1977 that Steve Biko was assassinated by police. And today we commemorate him, we remember him, we celebrate his legacy. And this was just the beginning of a very dynamic 1-hour special that we are going to be engaging in. And this is Steve Bantu Biko Street, a very popular song by a very, very well-renowned woman who will also be joining us as part of this engaging conversation. And in just a few moments, you need to make sure you stick around because we'll be chatting to some Piwe Dana. But before that, I'd love to introduce my very amazing, dynamic panel of people who all come from different spheres, who've all contributed in their own right towards the liberation of our people, my liberation, your liberation. But before that, Steve Biko, as we've always known him, was a popular voice of black liberation in South Africa between especially the mid-1960s and his death in police detention in 1977. So this was the period in which both the ANC and the PAC had been officially banned and disenfranchised as a black population, especially the youth, who were highly receptive to the prospect of a new organization that could carry their grievances against the apartheid state. So Steve Biko was the most recognizable figure of the black consciousness movement. And at the time, as he and others guided the movement of student discontent into a political force unprecedented in the history of South Africa, Steve Biko and his peers were responding to developments that emerged in the high phase of apartheid, when the Nationalist Party, in power for almost 2 decades, was restructuring the country to conform to its policies of separate development. So although Ndate, Steve Biko, was killed before his 31st birthday, his strong ideas and vigorous struggle to see them through left an indelible mark on the country and the youth who continue to fight the good fight. By all counts, his view was not against the white man, but rather in support of the development of the black people and the dismantling of the apartheid system. Steve Biko is best remembered for empowering black voices, instilling a sense of black pride, similar to that of the greatest leaders who have made changes in places where they have seen social injustice. So tonight we'll explore his legacy, his values and ethos through a series of discussions with his colleagues and comrades. And it gives me the greatest of honor to introduce them today. They form part of a powerful panel of individuals who will give us some insight into who this incredible man was. So we're joined in studio by Pandelani, Nefolovhodwe, who is a member of parliament and the former president of the South African Student Organization. He was there in Steve Biko's early days during the rise of the black consciousness movement, and it forms part of the founders of the South African Student Organization with Steve Biko. And he became the president of SASO after Steve Biko and is part of the first leadership that went to exile, the so-called SASO 8 from the 1975 trial held in Pretoria. And Tate, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Professor Itumeleng Mosala, who I have had the honor and privilege of capturing his story so eloquently in my past broadcasting life. He's the current president of the Azanian People's Organization, and in the previous Ukraina, keeping him in power. So, in my view, leaders have always told me that you don't step down. You will always be a soldier. He hails from the second generation of the student movement, the South African Student Organization, which was founded by Steve Biko. He served as a member of the executive, and he also worked very closely with Steve Biko in the King Williamstown in the Eastern Cape, where he was based at Fort Hare University. And that was during Steve Biko's banning and restrictions to the Eastern Cape between 1974 and 1976. And Tate, welcome and thank you so much. So we're also joined by a rose amongst the thorns. So Mojanku Gumbi is a senior advisor at ASG and former member of the Black Lawyers Association. So she is also an advocate and was part of the later generation of SASO leadership, which took the struggle further into the late 1970s and the early 1980s. And she was an activist based in Turfloor back then. And she also joins us to give us her perspective on the life and the legacy of the late, great Dr. Steve Biko. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And certainly, last but not least, we're joined by Ndade Diani Mabasa, who is a founding member and 3-time president of AZAPO. He was part of the generation that came in during the big trials in 1975 and was based in Soweto then. So during his high school years in Soweto, Ndade Mabasa became aware of the political situation in the country through reading material that was published by the South African Student Organization and his own experiences of mistreatment by the security police and having to produce a pass everywhere he went, like many other black South Africans, in fact, who were living under the apartheid regime. And it further awakened him to the reality of the implication of his skin color. So throughout his school years, Ndade Mabasa participated in the SASO's activities, got involved in the student Christian movement. In 1998, he founded the Socialist Party of Azania, based on the Black consciousness movement values and ideologies espoused by Steve Biko. Thank you all, and I welcome you. So I'm really, really, truly honored to be facilitating this discussion, and I just want us to have a very open, a very honest remembrance of him, because they killed him in 1977, but they certainly did not kill his ideologies. So first and foremost, I'll actually start with you, Dr. Pandelani. From your interactions with him, what were Steve Biko's core leadership qualities?
Now, Steve Biko's core leadership qualities was that of being capable of bringing people of different thought processes, meaning that he was a man who liked debates, who liked to argue, who liked to sit around and have a beer. And
my kind of guy.
Even when you are having that beer, you will then be discussing political issues and concept. So he was a conceptual person, so to speak. And also he had the capacity of bringing into his leadership people that perhaps some of them were even better than him.
Right.
But because he had that capacity of bringing them together so that they can together formulate a particular direction. Some of the writings that you see that he was capable of doing, much of the thinking there came from his colleagues. But he was just gifted in having to put those down into paper. But otherwise, he worked with a lot of people. If I had the time, I will give you a lot of them one by one and describing their particular qualities. So that was the kind of person he was.
Ndade Mabasa, at the formation of the Black consciousness movement, was the general feeling on the people really, at the time, I'm more interested to know what exactly it was, and why did you target the youth specifically?
There was a time after the banning of the ANC and the PAC where black people were actually a broken people, to a point where just to try and say something political from your home, from your teachers, everywhere, people will say, please don't go there because people have gone to jail and whatever else they can say. It was a time when people went to jail for inscribing maybe the name Mandela on a mug at work. It was a time where if white people came walking on the pavement, would have to go to the street, even if there's danger of you being knocked by cars. And therefore, when SASO started at tertiary institutions. They had started because they were starting a debate. Maybe the core thinking was what Biko said, saying we're becoming spectators in the game we should be playing. We have to wait for Helen Suzman to say something about ourselves when actually we can say that ourselves because we have a lived experience. And that's why Black Consciousness was able to capture the mind of the youth. We often say Black Consciousness was simply the scientific articulation of the conditions and also the aspirations of Black people. And I think that sums up why so many young people came to the Black Consciousness movement.
All right, if you've just tuned in, welcome to the discussion. Such an important day. Now, today we are honoring the legacy of Steve Biko, and we're doing it in grand style. You're tuned into SABC's Stephen Bantu Biko Memorial Special Broadcast on Metro FM. And I urge you really to just tweet us, tag at Metro FM SA, make sure you hashtag Steve Biko Day, and just share with us your favorite quotes. Share with us some of your favorite, perhaps even stories that you will hear about Steve Biko in today's conversation. Share the information for any young person out there that is not tuned into the radio right now. Call your friends, call your relatives, make sure that they tune into Metro FM and be part of the conversation. Let's keep the movement going on social media, on Twitter, and you're more than welcome to call in because we will be taking your calls. If you have any questions for the panel, you can call in on 089-110-3377. You can also tag me at Masechaba Ndlovu. And we're joined on the panel by Pandelani, Nefolovhodwe, Professor Itumeleng Mosala, Mabasa, as well as the Mojanku Gumbi. So, Mama, let me come to you. First and foremost, one of the things that has always interested me about Steve Biko as a young person is really, more than anything, just how fearless and how selfless he was. A quality that we don't really see very often today because the circumstances have certainly changed. But what for you would you credit to be the legacy that Steve Biko, or at least the legacy that we should remember?
Well, I think for me, one of the most important values that I take from the Black Consciousness movement, I'm not a contemporary of Steve Biko. I was just about 9 years old when he led the walkout from NUSAS to form SASO. But I think the most important value that I take from him is one of self-reliance for me. You have to do things for yourself. You have to occupy the space that is around you. When you walk into a place, whether it's at work, whether it's at school and all that, you have to make people be aware that that's your space. I always say to people, there are all sorts of rules that we have to deal with in this country, and some people forget that they are guests, they are our guests. So the rules that must apply are our rules that must apply. So for me, it's that fearlessness continues to this day. There's never a day when I don't confront injustice, when I don't confront the denigration of Black people. Not a day goes by, and I think that's the kind of legacy that he has left. And I see it every day also with the young people. I mean, many people have spoken about it, working with young people, that fearlessness. And lastly, the person who captured it well for me was Madiba. He says, the first time I confronted young people that were fearless was when the Black Consciousness group arrived on Robben Island.
Wow.
He says, at that time we were so scared of the warders. And when the warders said stand, these guys would sit. When the warders said sit, they would stand. And Madiba says, I told them that these whites are going to kill you. And they said to me, so what?
Wow.
So they had conquered fear, and they had conquered fear of white supremacy. And for me, that's really, for me, it's my daily mantra.
Right.
Yeah.
I love what you said about, really just owning our space and knowing that they are visitors. The sad reality is that they own 87% plus of our land. So we have lost our sense of self. And Professor, what do you have to say to this, especially in light of the legacy that Steve Biko has left us, as Gumbi has articulated?
Let me say, Masechaba, that I am proud that 40 years after Steve's death, we have not surrendered on that matter. We boycotted the first elections for a new dispensation in South Africa, precisely because we felt very strongly that if the land question is not central to the arrangement and the settlement that was being given to black people, then actually the package is faulty. We are not going to be free. People laughed at us in 1990, 91, 92, up to 94, and particularly because we refused to participate in the elections. Even Archbishop Desmond Tutu was not happy with us. I still have memories of him after voting, shouting and saying, "I am free." I am so glad that he has lived to see that we are not free. The only thing that people have to accept was that Steve had inculcated the courage that you've talked about, the fearlessness that we've talked about, that Mojanku was talking about just now, and the intellectual depth that Steve had, which Pandelani has just talked about. It was just incredible. In my view, the two other things that we haven't talked about, that we don't talk about sufficiently, are one, that Steve Biko was an organizational genius. Now, when I look at black organizations at the moment, and notably the African National Congress, I mean, not that I hold any brief for the ANC, but you know, the ANC is the oldest movement in our country.
Sure.
And it was built over many years by our parents, by strong people. To see it in the disarray in which it is means that we've missed something of the things that we should have inherited from Steve Biko. There are no organizational geniuses anymore. There are just self-serving people everywhere. Our own movement has been weakened over time. We would blame, of course, the ANC for this because they made sure that we didn't have the resources. They spoke ill of us. They called us CIA, all kinds of bad stuff. I'm glad that the philosophy of Biko has survived to make people turn up